Hello, everybody. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here to talk to you about one of the monuments of the 20th century keyboard literature. I just love monuments, don't you? I'm talking about Shostakovich's 24 Preludes and Fugues, opus 87. And the wonderful thing about this particular monument is that it's not so hard to wrap your arms around discographically. I mean, when you're dealing with other monuments like the Beethoven piano sonatas, where there are 500 billion versions of them, or Bach's Well-Tempered Clavier, where not only are there 500 billion versions of them, but there are 500 billion versions of them on harpsichord or piano or something in between. It's just impossible to get a sense of what's out there and make sensible recommendations. All you could really do is pick a pile and say, "Hi, here, have some." Help yourself. It's like a buffet. You just go where you stick your hand in the snack thing and go for it. You know what I mean? So I'm making a mess here. So the situation, as I have a cataclysm here. Not with the cat, by the way. This was my own fault. With Shostakovich's Preludes and Fugues is rather different. They've been recorded a handful of times, and the discography is rather clear. And the reason is because really nobody paid much attention to them for most of their existence. They were only composed in 1951. The story's very well known. Shostakovich went to Leipzig to be part of a piano jury for a piano competition on the 200th anniversary of Bach's death. And that was in 1950, would have been 200 years. 1951, they had this piano competition, or they had it in 50, I don't know, something like that. But he was so impressed by the playing of Tatiana Nikolayeva, who won first prize, that he started composing Preludes and Fugues because she had prepared the entire Well-Tempered Clavier to play from memory. And Shostakovich thought, gee, I can do that. And what the hell? And so he started writing them. And as with most of his more interesting or sophisticated pieces, the Union of Soviet Composers condemned them as being formalistic and too technically complex and not socialist realist enough, etc., etc., etc. And, Shostakovich himself recorded a few of them. Of these pieces, not terribly well. He was not a very good pianist. Everyone says, oh, he was a great pianist, but why are his recordings so lousy? Well, they're not always lousy, but he was a somewhat brittle, neurotic interpreter of his own music because he was a brittle, neurotic human being in all other respects. And, for example, he did his piano concertos, as you know, and I like those performances, but lots of people do them better. Same thing here. And we really, nobody paid much attention to these pieces as a cycle because you never heard them as a cycle until Tatiana Nikolayeva recorded the complete set for Hyperion around 1990 or so, somewhere around there. And all of a sudden, everybody woke up and went, aha! Especially because discographically, you have to remember what was going on in 1990. This was when, the universe of CDs had exploded with tons of everything being recorded by everybody. And here was an incredibly major statement by, the 20th century's major Russian composer that nobody knew. That nobody knew at all. And that Hyperion recording, which is very good, it still sounds very good, sold a lot. And it was 3 discs of piano music by Shostakovich, who was not known for his keyboard writing. It was really an astonishing thing. And it added an entirely new dimension to our understanding of Shostakovich because, some of the pieces, of course, are dark, and many of them are twitchy and neurotic, as he was. But the music has, of course, a poise and a grace and a variety. The preludes run from there's a passacaglia, there's a waltz, there's a scherzo and trio. He plays with all of his forms and styles too in miniature. And then the fugues are marvelous. He uses fugue subjects of every possible variety and created a whole cosmos in 24 handy-dandy pieces. And so I propose to talk to you about my 5 favorite versions of the Preludes and Fugues. Now, really, there are very few poor recordings because pianists who take them on tend to know what they're doing. The only one I don't really like is Melnikoff's on Harmonia Mundi. I'm not sure why that turned out to be so irritating to me anyway, but it's kind of a mess. He's sort of all over the place. And I also think that they should be performed. I don't yeah, not with the kind of romantic freedom that a lot of pianists are used to taking just because it's contemporary music, if you know what I mean. I really prefer that they be done with a little bit of restraint, and the character of the music is abundantly self-evident in every piece, and I like the clarity and the little bit of the style. I mean, they're preludes and fugues. These are not big sonatas. They're not crazy emotional outpourings, although they become that way as they sort of move on. At least when you get to the final prelude and fugue in D minor, which is obviously a major statement by Shostakovich, and I tend to think that it supports the idea that he intended the cycle to be performed as a whole, because there is a progression of mood and of feeling leading up to that final prelude and fugue. Of course, it's Shostakovich, so there must be some hidden meaning that we have no idea what it is, and Tatiana Nikolayeva never told us what it was, even though she worked with him effectively in creating the piece. He tried out all these pieces on her first, although he didn't make many revisions apparently. And it's an amazing piece of music, an astonishing piece of music, and one that people who are used to Shostakovich only from the symphonies and his larger orchestral pieces and some of the chamber pieces that are all deeply tragic and incredibly gut-wrenching, they should really hear this. I like it because it presents another side to the composer while being every bit himself. Now, I have a bit of a history reviewing recordings of this. Originally, the first time I actually had a chance to write about them was when I was a critic at Fanfare magazine. And I had the Nicolieva performance, and I had the Keith Jarrett on ECM, which is now, in my opinion, no longer one of the prime recommendations for the work. But at the time, those were the two. Nicolieva did them earlier from Melodia, but those weren't available. And so you had the choice of those two. And I sat down with the score and with a piano friend of mine, and we went through both recordings. That was a marathon, let me tell you, and compared every prelude and every fugue. And I believe, if I recall correctly, that I had decided that Nicolieva was somewhat better in the preludes, because that's where you really want to have personality and character, and because she understood, Shostakovich himself and the Russian quality, and she was there when they were created. But I liked Keith Jarrett in the fugues because his playing was a little bit cooler, a little bit more technically, I think, polished. And, but it was 6 and 1, a half dozen in the other. You had to hear both because it was a work that was as good as unknown. And the more interpretations we had of it, the better we could wrap our brains around what the interpretive possibilities were. Now the situation is somewhat different. There are more versions available, more good versions available. And so I'm just going to tell you what my favorites are. Now, first of all, you have to start with Nicolieva. I think her Hyperion recording is very, very good. When the Melodia performances came out, people immediately started saying, well, the Hyperion wasn't as good as her earlier Melodia ones. Maybe not. It could be she's a bit older, a little bit less technically finished. The one I like the best is this one. This is the 1987 Melodia. She did it like 3 or 4 times. There's a video and then 3 actual recordings of the whole cycle. One from the early 60s. This is her middle one. I think it's fantastic. Don't you just love the jolly Soviet happy photo here with Shostakovich? I mean, it's like, oh my God, there they are having a good time, right? Oh my goodness. But it's a magnificent performance, and you have to hear Nicolieva because she was there at the creation, and she has a certain way about them. Now, her performances tend to be slower than almost everyone who came subsequently, and that can be an issue for some. I think she takes a bit too much time over some of the fugues. That's my view, but I mean, there's no questioning her authority. And so I don't question her authority. Next, in the series of really fine recordings, this came as a surprise. Vladimir Ashkenazy. It's very, very easy to kind of sneer at Ashkenazy because he's recorded so much. I was talking to my colleague Jed Disler about this just the other day. Shostakovich gets a lot. Ashkenazy takes a lot of guff because he's just done so much. He's one of those guys like Zubin Mehta, I believe, whose career was actually harmed by having recorded so much because, again, you can't wrap your brain around all of it, and there's a tendency to just dismiss it. He's a technically fluent pianist, and people don't give him credit for being intelligent and interesting and insightful. We were talking about his Beethoven sonatas, which are really much better than a lot of people give them credit for. Why? Because no one pays attention to them. And he's done like the complete everything for everybody. But this Shostakovich Preludes and Fugues we pay attention to because it's a little bit extraordinary, unusual. It's not part of the, it's not a Chopin cycle, a Rachmaninoff cycle, a Beethoven cycle, a blah, blah, you know what I mean? And it's very, very good. It's extremely good. And it's a very, very welcome and salutary reminder of just what a fine pianist Ashkenazy is. So that's also good to have. However, there are three that I think are really extraordinary and easy to find. And, aside from Nicolieva, that I think sort of represent the modern standard in what these pieces should be. And I've got samples. Sherbachoff on Naxos. This is absolutely first class. Performances are splendid in every particular. I particularly like Sherbachoff's way with the preludes, and I'm going to play you a sample of the waltz prelude, which is the prelude in D flat major. It's one of Shostakovich's wacky waltzes. You hear it instantly and know immediately who the composer is. Take a listen. Great fun, a marvelous, marvelous cycle, and I think one that has a lot to recommend it, and it's definitely worth having. And you can get like 3 or 4 bunches of these things and dip into them at will, and it's fun to compare and contrast different performances. Another absolutely excellent cycle that people tend not to mention because, it's on a smaller label is David Jalbert on Atma. This is an absolutely first-class performance by a first-class thinking pianist. I really like these performances. They have a crispness and a freshness that's quite striking. And the sample I want to play you is from the fugue in F sharp minor. Now, this fugue can take forever, or seem to take forever. It is the absolute apotheosis of glumness in music, the way some people do it. It could stretch out endlessly, it seems. And here it flows. And he has a wonderful articulation in the fugue theme, so that even though the harmonies are so strange, is it happy? Is it sad? It's a very disturbing piece of music. It really is. I don't think I've ever heard a fugue that is quite so unsettling. You don't really know. Is it major? Is it minor? Is it happy? Is it sad? And then there's some really scary dissonances along the way. I'm going to play you a little bit of the central portion of that fugue, just so you can get a sense of what I mean. But listen to how marvelously he articulates the theme and how clear it all sounds. I instead of just being a mess of glumitude, and dullness. Here. See what I mean? Very, very effective. And the whole performance goes like that, in the sense that it's a very well judged and sensible performance with a lot of intelligence behind it. And so I recommend that very, very strongly on Atma. However, my favorite, and this is a personal favorite, it's just a personal favorite because, quite frankly, the performance was given by a pianist who I know quite well. And so, you may say I have a certain bias, and I freely admit that I have a certain bias towards her personally, but I don't think artistically. I think I'm pretty straight away artistically, and I could very easily recommend her version as one of the best, but not the best. So, without doing any disservice to our friendship, if that were the whole point, of course, which it isn't. But I'm telling you that up front so that you can judge it as you may. Jenny Lin on Hensler. Now, Jenny Lin has a career now as a teacher and as a contemporary music specialist, and she's made some splendid recordings. I lent her a tam-tam for one of her BIS recordings where she did sort of Orientalism in piano music. And she did, Kitelbe's, one of Kitelbe's pieces, and it has a tam-tam. And I don't know. I think she's a terrific, terrific pianist. And I love her way with Shostakovich. I really do. I didn't know she was doing these, actually. And this disc came as a big, big and pleasant surprise to me when it came out, when I found out she was doing them. And I was a little nervous because I thought, oh, God, there's Nicolieva, with these other people. But I had nothing to fear. She's a wonderful technician and a very, very smart lady. And she plays these pieces with a kind of wide-eyed freshness and no preconceptions about what they can be. And I love that. I hear this recording and I sense, a feeling of discovery behind the music. It all sounds new. And you look for that in a performance, especially if something this big and this long and this ambitious. And she has more than the technical chops for things like, the big D minor prelude and fugue at the end. It's a wonderful, wonderful cycle. I want to play you just a little bit of the A major fugue. And, now the A major fugue is remarkable. I play it for friends, and when I say guess the composer, because it doesn't sound anything like Shostakovich. You'd never know in a million years that it's Shostakovich. The theme is an A major arpeggio, basically. All of the harmony is pure harmony. There are almost no obvious chromatic dissonances anywhere in this fugue. It's almost like folk music. It's so simple and pellucidly clear, and that's exactly how Jenny plays it. She plays it like a crystalline flowing stream of pure spring water. That's the way I like to think about it. It's a piece that you have to be smart enough not to try too hard to inflect. You have to play with extreme digital clarity, but you have to let that music ripple on, like as if self-propelled. I've seldom heard an artist capture the essence of the music as beautifully as she does here. And she does it all over this piece. I mean, this is just a typical example. But just listen to the opening and listen to this fugue and think, aha, Shostakovich wrote this? Yes, he did. Extraordinary, isn't it? Isn't it wonderful? And I always like to pull out this fugue because it really gives you something of the range that you find in this microcosm, this microcosmos, let's call it, of Shostakovich's musical world. There is his wacky side, his demented side, his tragic side, but also here and in very few other places in his work, an innocence, a naturalness, an ease that you almost never hear in Shostakovich's music. And I really think that has to be relished and celebrated for the special moment that it is. And Jenny Lind does that. And for that, I am extremely grateful. And that's why I love her version of the Shostakovich 24 Preludes and Fugues, opus 87. But any of these will do you very, very well, because the piece is larger than any one interpretation could encompass. It offers so many fantastic opportunities for the pianist and for us as listeners to dip into its splendid, multifarious world of emotional expression and form and structure, and it's just such a great piece. Such a great piece. Such an affirmation of Shostakovich's genius in whatever he attempted, and I cannot recommend it to you highly enough. So, keep on listening, folks. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care.